The coastal diner sat 3 miles from the Naval Special Warfare Command Training Facility, where the smell of bacon grease and coffee mixed with salt air from the nearby Pacific. Red vinyl booths lined the windows and the checkered linoleum. Floors had seen decades of military boots, work shoes, and sneakers. It was the kind of place where warriors became ordinary customers, where classified conversations stopped at the door, and where everyone minded their own business. Meet Rachel Martinez, 28 years old, with long brown hair tied back in a practical bun that never came loose during her double shifts. She worked afternoons at the diner after finishing her morning shifts at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, where she helped wounded soldiers rebuild their strength through physical therapy. Her uniform was simple but neat: black slacks, white button-down shirt, and a coffee-stained apron tied around her waist. Her name tag sat slightly crooked, a small imperfection that somehow made her more approachable. Nobody knew anything about her past, and nobody bothered to ask. In a town where half the population had military connections, everyone had stories they preferred to keep buried. Rachel fit perfectly into that unspoken understanding. The lunch rush brought its usual crowd of SEALs from the base, young enlisted. Men who thought teasing the waitress was entertainment. They came in groups of 4 or 5, fresh from training exercises, full of testosterone and the casual cruelty that comes with youth and power. They called her Waitress Girl and never used her actual name, despite it being printed clearly on her chest. Marcus Thompson, a cocky SEAL with a fresh buzz cut and an attitude to match, had become the unofficial leader of their daily harassment. "Bet she can barely carry that tray, let alone handle a weapon," he said loud enough for Rachel to hear, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate slowness. His buddies laughed on cue. Yeah, if a real attack happened, she'd be the first to scream and run for cover, added Jake Williams, another young SEAL with too much confidence and too little wisdom. Probably trip over her own feet. That's what happens when you wash out of basic training, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You end up serving coffee to real warriors. The jokes were constant, relentless, and cruel in that casual way that groups of young men can be when they think someone is beneath them. Rachel refilled their cups, took their orders for burgers and fries, and said, "Thank you, and have a nice day," with the same calm voice every single time. She never complained to management, never reported them for harassment, and never showed any sign that their words affected her whatsoever. To them, she was furniture, background noise, a person who existed solely to bring them food and disappear back into the kitchen. They had no idea they were mocking someone who could have killed them all with her bare hands before they could blink. During slow afternoons, Rachel would sit in the corner booth reading medical journals, studying anatomy diagrams and rehabilitation techniques, while other waitresses gossiped about customers and complained about tips. Rachel listened to police scanners through earbuds, her priorities fundamentally different from everyone around her. When military vehicles drove past the window Humvees, transport trucks, personnel carriers, her eyes tracked them automatically. Old habits that she couldn't shake, muscle memory from a life she was trying to leave behind. The diner had become her sanctuary, a place where she could blend into the background and help people in small, simple ways. Refilling coffee cups, making sure the elderly veteran in booth 3 got his favorite apple pie, remembering that the young Marine corporal took his eggs over easy. These tiny acts of service felt honest in a way that her previous life never had. But sanctuaries have a way of becoming battlefields when you least expect it, and Rachel Martinez carried secrets that would eventually demand to be revealed. Every day she walked through those doors, she was one emergency away from becoming someone else entirely. The question wasn't whether her past would catch up with her. The question was whether she would be ready when it did. Tuesday afternoon brought the usual lunch crowd, But something felt different to Rachel. 3 years of serving tables had taught her to read the energy of a room the way others read newspapers. Today, that energy felt wrong. The diner buzzed with typical conversation military personnel mixed with local civilians, construction workers, and a few truckers passing through. Normal energy for a weekday, but Rachel's trained senses picked up subtle inconsistencies that most people would never notice. A stranger sat alone at table 6, mid-40s, well-dressed in a business suit that looked expensive but felt wrong for this neighborhood. He kept checking his watch every 30 seconds with nervous precision, his eyes constantly scanning the room like he was mapping exits and counting personnel. Something felt fundamentally wrong about him. Too alert for someone having a casual lunch, too focused on tactical details that normal customers would never notice. His positioning gave him clear sight lines to both entrances, the kitchen door and the emergency exit. Professional surveillance, and Rachel recognized it immediately. Years of training had made pattern recognition as automatic as breathing. The man ordered black coffee, didn't touch the menu, didn't make small talk. Just sat there watching, waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. Meanwhile, the young SEALs were in rare form today. Marcus Thompson had brought reinforcements 6 men instead of the usual 4, and their harassment had escalated beyond the typical crude jokes. "Hey, waitress girl," Marcus called out as Rachel approached their table with coffee refills. "My buddy here thinks you might actually be tougher than you look." I told him that was impossible. The new addition to their group, SEAL, named Danny Foster with sergeant stripes and a mean smile, leaned back in his chair. "Really? She looks like she'd faint at the sight of blood. Probably never even been in a real fight," Jake Williams added, emboldened by the larger group. "Bet she's never even held a gun." Rachel continued pouring coffee with steady hands, her face betraying nothing. But something had shifted in her posture, a subtle tightening around her eyes that spoke of patience wearing thin. "You know what? I think," Marcus continued, his voice getting louder, drawing attention from other tables. "I think she's probably never even been outside this boring little town. Never seen anything dangerous. Never faced anything that mattered." The irony was so complete it almost made Rachel smile. These men who spent their days training to become elite warriors had no idea they were mocking someone who had already walked through hell and chosen to come back. "Leave her alone, guys." The voice came from an unexpected source, Tommy Rodriguez, a younger SEAL who usually went along with the group's behavior. "She's just doing her job." Marcus turned on him immediately. "What's wrong with you, Rodriguez? You going soft?" "I'm just saying, maybe we should focus on our food instead of bothering people who are working." The tension at their table was palpable now, drawing glances from other customers. Rachel finished pouring coffee and started to walk away, but Marcus wasn't done. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he said, his voice sharp with authority. "Don't walk away when a customer is talking to you." Rachel stopped and turned back, her voice perfectly calm. "Is there something else I can get for you?" "Yeah, an answer. Have you ever been in a real fight? Ever faced anything dangerous in your whole boring life?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Rachel looked at Marcus Thompson, 22 years old, fresh out of advanced training, proud of his new skills and eager to prove his superiority. She saw herself at that age, cocky and certain that training made her invincible. "No," she said simply. "I've lived a very quiet life." The lie came easily, practiced over 3 years of hiding in plain sight. But as she walked back to the coffee station, she caught the eye of the stranger at table 6. He was watching the interaction with the intense focus of someone who recognized danger when he saw it. That's when Rachel noticed his hand moving toward his jacket, a subtle motion that would have been invisible to anyone without her training. Her blood went cold as muscle memory kicked in, years of combat experience flooding back in an instant. The peaceful sanctuary she had built was about to become a battlefield, and she was the only one who saw it coming. The lunch rush continued. Around Rachel, as she moved through the diner with practiced efficiency, but every nerve ending was now on high alert. The stranger at table 6 had settled back into his watching posture, but she'd seen enough to know that whatever he was waiting for was about to happen. Her hands remained steady as she refilled coffee cups and delivered plates of food, but her mind was racing through threat assessments and contingency plans. 3 years of serving tables hadn't dulled her tactical instincts. They'd only learned to hide beneath a veneer of civilian normalcy. The harassment from Marcus Thompson's table had reached a crescendo that was drawing uncomfortable attention from other customers. Their voices carried across the diner, loud enough that conversations at nearby tables had stopped. "I bet she's never even been in a car accident," Danny Foster was saying, his voice dripping with condescension. "Probably thinks a paper cut is a major injury. Look at her," Marcus added, gesturing in Rachel's direction. "Walking around like she owns the place, but she's just a nobody serving coffee to people who actually matter." Tommy Rodriguez had gone quiet, clearly uncomfortable with the escalation, but unwilling to challenge his teammates further. The dynamic at their table had shifted into something uglier, and Rachel could feel the hostile energy spreading through the restaurant like poison. That's when Staff Sergeant Daniel Murphy walked through the front door. 20-year veteran, combat ribbons, and the kind of scars that told stories he'd never share with civilians. He swept the room with practiced eyes, taking in the scene at Marcus's table, the uncomfortable silence from other customers, and Rachel's position behind the counter. Something about his posture made Rachel look up from the order pad she was pretending to study. Their eyes met across the crowded diner, and she saw recognition there not of her face, but of her bearing. The way she held herself, the way her eyes tracked movement, the subtle signs that separated wolves from sheep. Murphy approached the counter with purpose, his movement cutting through the diner's chaos like a blade through water. Other customers instinctively moved out of his way, recognizing the presence of someone who commanded respect through actions rather than words. He leaned across the counter, close enough that only Rachel could hear him, and said 3 words. That hit her like lightning. Black Echo, table 6. The code phrase from a life she'd tried to leave behind. Military emergency protocol, level red classification, lives at stake, no questions asked. Rachel's blood went cold as muscle memory. Flooded back training, discipline, and the automatic responses that had kept her alive in places where hesitation meant death. She froze for exactly 1 second, and nodded almost imperceptibly and set down her coffee pot with careful precision. The friendly Waitress facade melted away like snow in sunlight, replaced by something harder, more dangerous, and infinitely more capable. Black Echo meant immediate threat, armed and dangerous, civilians in the line of fire. Murphy wouldn't use those words unless someone was about to die. Rachel's posture shifted from service industry professional to predatory hunter, every movement becoming calculated and purposeful. She walked slowly toward table 6, her entire energy transforming in ways that most people couldn't identify. But everyone could feel. The stranger was now reaching inside his jacket with deliberate motion, his hand moving toward his waistband in a movement she'd seen 1,000 times in hostile territories overseas. The telltale signs of someone drawing a concealed weapon, trying to maintain the appearance of casual movement while preparing for violence. Other customers continued their conversations, completely oblivious to the danger developing 15 feet away from their lunch plates. Marcus Thompson's table was still laughing at their own jokes, unaware that their boring waitress was the only thing standing between them and a mass casualty event. Rachel's training kicked in automatically. Threat assessment, distance calculation, angle of attack, civilian proximity, all processed in microseconds. The stranger's hand found something metallic and started to withdraw it slowly, but Rachel could see the outline of a compact weapon taking shape beneath his jacket. 3 years of hiding had just ended. The woman who had saved lives in Syria was about to do it again in a small-town diner, and this time, everyone would see exactly who Rachel Martinez really was. The stranger's hand found the grip of his weapon, and Rachel saw death approaching with the clarity that only comes from walking that line too many times before. The compact pistol with an extended magazine emerged slowly from his jacket, its black metal catching the fluorescent light of the diner. What happened next took less than 5 seconds, but would replay in every witness's mind for the rest of their lives. Rachel moved with the fluid precision of someone for whom violence was a language spoken fluently. A swift hand sweep knocked the weapon from the stranger's grip before he could fully draw it. The gun clattered across the floor like a deadly snake, sliding under a nearby table as customers began to realize that something was terribly wrong. One precisely executed elbow strike to his solar plexus collapsed the man's diaphragm, doubling him over as he gasped for air that wouldn't come. A perfectly timed hip throw sent him crashing into the adjacent table. Dishes shattering, chairs overturning, salt and pepper shakers exploding across the checkered linoleum floor. The entire sequence was textbook disarmament and neutralization, executed with the kind of efficiency that takes years to master and never fully leaves your muscle memory. The stranger collapsed unconscious before he hit the ground, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where he'd struck the table edge. The diner erupted in chaos. Customers screamed and dove for cover. Staff members ducked behind counters. And someone called 911 with shaking hands. But Rachel had already returned to the coffee station, picking up her pot and checking her order pad as if she'd just cleaned up a spilled drink instead of preventing a mass shooting. Marcus Thompson's table had gone dead silent, their faces pale with shock and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. The woman they'd been mocking, the boring waitress they dismissed as beneath their notice, had just neutralized an armed threat with movements so fast and precise that their trained eyes could barely follow them. Staff Sergeant Murphy approached. Rachel cautiously, his voice filled with a respect that hadn't been there moments before. "Ma'am, we need to talk. Immediately." "My shift ends at 4, Rachel replied calmly, refilling a shocked customer's cup as police sirens wailed in the distance. "This situation can't wait." "Then it'll have to," she said, continuing to serve customers as if nothing had happened. The calm in her voice was more unsettling than screaming would have been, a reminder that for her, this level of violence was just another Tuesday afternoon. Police and base security arrived with sirens blaring, turning the quiet diner into a crime scene. News crews gathered outside, drawn by reports of a potential terrorist incident at the military town's most popular restaurant. Through it all, Rachel moved with supernatural calm, giving a brief statement to investigators that revealed nothing beyond the basic facts. The stranger was arrested and transported under heavy guard. A background check revealed extensive connections to domestic terrorist networks, and explosives were found in his car parked strategically outside the diner. Detailed surveillance photos showed the SEAL facility, patrol schedules, guard rotations, and weak points in perimeter security. He'd been planning a coordinated attack for months, and the diner was his final reconnaissance mission before executing a bombing that would have killed dozens of America's finest warriors. Rachel Martinez had just prevented a mass casualty event, and she'd done it with the same casual efficiency most people reserve for taking out the trash. As investigators processed the scene, one detail became impossible to ignore. The weapon the stranger had been carrying was military grade, and his tactical positioning suggested advanced training. This wasn't some angry civilian with a grudge. This was a professional, and he'd been stopped by a waitress who moved like she'd been born for combat. The question that nobody wanted to ask was becoming impossible to avoid. Exactly who was Rachel Martinez, and where had she learned to fight like that? Rachel was escorted to an interrogation room at the naval base under heavy security protocol. She didn't resist, didn't demand a lawyer, didn't make phone calls. She just sat quietly with her hands folded, waiting patiently like she had all the time in the world. Base Commander Colonel Patricia Hayes, a 30-year veteran who had seen everything the military could throw at her, ordered a comprehensive fingerprint scan. Standard procedure for anyone involved in a security incident of this magnitude, but the results that came back made everyone in the room go completely silent. The computer screen flickered as databases searched through military records, federal databases, and international intelligence networks. Then it displayed results that changed everything. Phoenix 7 classified. Mia. Missing in action presumed. Kier. The blood drained from Colonel Hayes' face as she read the screen, her hands actually trembling as she processed what she was seeing. Phoenix 7 was a legendary special operations unit that had operated behind enemy lines in Syria. Black budget, need-to-know clearance only. Officially, they had been wiped out in a coordinated ambush 3 years ago. All 7 members listed as killed in action, memorial services held with full honors, families notified with folded flags, and the eternal gratitude of a nation that would never know their names. But the woman sitting calmly across from them was very much alive. Colonel Hayes pulled classified files from a secure terminal, her fingers shaking as she accessed drone footage from the archives. Military intelligence, grainy black and white. Video from a rooftop in Damascus. The timestamp showed 14:23 hours, 3 years ago. The footage was poor quality, taken from extreme distance through desert heat distortion. But it showed a female operative dragging a wounded SEAL from a burning Humvee while under heavy automatic weapons fire. Bullets kicked up dirt around her. Boots, explosions lit up the screen, and she moved with impossible calm through absolute hell. When they ran facial recognition software, comparing bone structure with Rachel Martinez, the match was 97%. "How are you alive?" Colonel Hayes asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "I didn't follow the extraction order. I chose to stay behind so nobody else would die unnecessarily." She explained briefly, without emotion, how communications had been severed after the ambush. How command had presumed the entire team dead based on satellite imagery and lack of radio contact. She could have corrected the records, could have walked into any American embassy and returned to service with full honors and back pay. Instead, she had chosen silence. Let the memorial stand. Let the families have their closure and their heroes. "Why would you do that?" Colonel Hayes asked. "Because some things matter more than setting the record straight." Staff Sergeant Murphy stepped forward, recognition dawning in his eyes like sunrise after a long night. His voice cracked with emotion. As memories flooded back, "You're the one who pulled me from that burning Humvee. I remember your voice. You kept saying, 'Stay with me, soldier. Don't you dare quit on me.'" He had thought she was dead for 3 years, had carried crushing survivor's guilt, wondering why he lived when his rescuer didn't. He had spoken at her memorial service too. A room full of grieving families and fellow warriors, his voice breaking as he described her sacrifice. "I gave a eulogy about your heroism," he whispered, tears forming. "Your parents were there, your sister. They were so proud." "Good," Rachel replied without emotion. They needed closure more than they needed the truth. Colonel Hayes opened a high-security vault with biometric locks and withdrew a red velvet box that had been waiting for 3 years. Inside was a Medal of Valor, the nation's second-highest military honor. Engraved on the back in precise letters, Rachel Martinez, Phoenix 7, for actions above and beyond the call of duty. This was awarded posthumously after reviewing classified footage of your actions. We never thought we'd present it to you alive. Rachel stared at the medal for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I can't accept recognition for doing my job. 5 SEALs lived because of my actions, but 7 died despite my best efforts. The math doesn't work in my favor. The weight of survivor's guilt hung heavy in the small room, a burden she had carried alone for 3 years. But now, finally, there were people who understood the price of coming home when others didn't. Word spread through the base like wildfire, carried by whispers in secure channels and encrypted messages between commanders who couldn't believe what they were hearing. Phoenix 7 operative alive, working as a waitress, prevented terrorist attack with her bare hands. Within hours, the story had reached the highest levels of military command, and orders came down from Washington. Full security detail, media, blackout, and immediate debriefing by a joint task force that included representatives from every branch of special operations. But Rachel Martinez had other plans. She returned to the coastal diner the next afternoon. Same black slacks, same white shirt, same coffee-stained apron. The difference was that now every single person in the restaurant stood when she walked through the door. Veterans, active duty, personnel, civilians, even the cook came out from the kitchen. The transformation was complete and irreversible. The invisible waitress had become a living legend, and there was no going back to anonymity. Staff Sergeant Murphy approached her, stationed with obvious reverence, his voice filled with emotion he couldn't quite name. "Ma'am, we want to hang your photograph in our unit memorial hall alongside the other Phoenix 7 members. But if you prefer, we'll keep table 6 reserved for you always." The young SEALs who had tormented her for months lined up like schoolchildren to apologize, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame and something approaching awe. Marcus Thompson, who had led the daily harassment, could barely meet her eyes. "We didn't know who you were," he said, his voice breaking. "But even if we didn't know, we had no right to disrespect you like that." Rachel's response cut through him like a blade. "You don't apologize for not knowing my history. You apologize for how you chose to treat another human being when you didn't know their story." The distinction hit them like a physical blow, a lesson that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Respect wasn't something you earned through rank or recognition. It was something you gave because it was right. Tommy Rodriguez, the young SEAL who had tried to stop the harassment, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "I should have done more. I should have stood up to them from the beginning." "You spoke up when it mattered," Rachel replied. That took more courage than most people ever show. Colonel Hayes arrived with a security detail and official orders from the Pentagon, but Rachel met her at the door with quiet determination. "I'm not going anywhere," she said simply. "This is where I belong. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you personally. There are honors to be presented, medals to be awarded, a nation that wants to thank you. The nation thanked me 3 years ago at my memorial service. My family has closure. My teammates are remembered as heroes, and 5 good men gotta go home to their families. That's all the recognition I need." The standoff was unprecedented. A presumed dead special operations soldier refusing direct orders from the highest levels of government, insisting on her right to remain an anonymous waitress in a small-town diner. But Rachel Martinez had walked through hell and chosen her own path home, and no amount of pressure was going to change her mind. The compromise came from an unexpected source. Staff Sergeant Murphy, whose life she had saved in Syria and who understood better than anyone the burden she carried. "Let her stay," he told Colonel Hayes. "She's earned the right to choose her own mission, and maybe this is exactly where she needs to be." The media attention was intense but carefully managed. The story that emerged was sanitized, stripped of classified details, but powerful enough to capture the nation's imagination. A decorated special operations soldier, presumed dead, working as a waitress, prevented a terrorist attack. The hashtag Table6 started trending worldwide, shared by people who had been underestimated, by veterans struggling with post-service identity, by anyone who had ever been judged by their current circumstances rather than their complete story. Messages poured in from every continent, from world leaders and fellow warriors, from ordinary people who saw something of themselves in Rachel's quiet determination to serve without seeking recognition. But the real change happened locally, in the coastal diner that had become an unofficial gathering place for veterans. Table 6 became a symbol not just of vigilance and sacrifice, but of the understanding that heroism comes in countless forms. Rachel continued working her regular shifts, still refilling coffee cups and taking orders for burgers and fries. The difference was that now she was serving people who understood that true service isn't about the uniform you wear or the medals on your chest. It's about showing up when others need you most. Marcus Thompson and his team became regular customers. In a different way, no longer the arrogant young warriors who thought they owned the world, but thoughtful soldiers who had learned something crucial about respect and humility. They started bringing other young SEALs to the diner, not to cause trouble, but to learn from the woman who embodied everything they hoped to become. She doesn't just serve coffee, Tommy Rodriguez told a new group of trainees one afternoon. She serves as a reminder that the greatest battles are often fought by people nobody notices, until the moment when everything depends on their quiet courage. The terrorist who had planned the attack was sentenced to life in prison, his network dismantled through intelligence gathered from his surveillance materials. The dozens of lives Rachel had saved would never know her name, would never understand how close they had come to tragedy, and she preferred it that way. Colonel Hayes made regular visits to the diner, not as a commanding officer, but as someone who had learned to recognize a different kind of leadership. She would sit at the counter, drink coffee, and watch Rachel work with the quiet efficiency that had made her legendary in covert operations. You could have any assignment you wanted, she told Rachel one quiet afternoon. Any base, any mission, any level of command. The president himself said you could write your own ticket. Rachel wiped down the counter with the same methodical precision she had once used to clean her weapons. I have everything I need right here. People who trust me, work that matters, and the chance to make a difference in small but important ways. Don't you miss the action? The importance of what you used to do. Rachel looked around the diner, at the elderly veteran reading his newspaper in booth 3, at the young Marine corporal studying for his sergeant's exam, at the group of SEALs quietly planning their next training exercise. This is important, she said simply. Every person who walks through that door has a story, a burden, a need to be seen and valued. Maybe preventing one terrorist attack makes headlines, but preventing one suicide, one moment of despair, one young soldier from making a terrible mistake, that matters just as much. It was a philosophy that would reshape how the military thought. About service, about the different ways soldiers could continue their mission even after hanging up their uniform. 2 years after the incident at Table 6, the Coastal Diner had become something unique in military culture, a place where rank didn't matter, where stories were respected even when they couldn't be told, where the most decorated heroes might be the people you'd never suspect. Rachel Martinez still worked her regular shifts, still wore the same simple uniform, still served coffee with the same quiet efficiency. But she had become something more than a waitress, more than a legendary special operations soldier, more than the sum of her public recognition. She had become a guardian of stories, a keeper of quiet courage, a reminder that the most important battles are often fought by people nobody notices until everything depends on their presence. The young SEALs who came through the diner now were different from the arrogant warriors of years past. They had been shaped by the story of Phoenix 7, by the understanding that true strength comes not from what you can do to others, but from what you choose to do for others. Marcus Thompson, now a staff sergeant himself, brought his new trainees to the diner as part of their informal education. Not to meet a celebrity or hear war stories, but to understand something fundamental about service that couldn't be taught in any classroom. See that woman behind the counter? He would tell them quietly. She saved more lives in 5 seconds than most of us will save in our entire careers. But that's not why she's important. She's important because she chose to stay, chose to serve. In a different way, chose to be exactly where people needed her to be. The lesson went deeper than military service. In a world obsessed with fame and recognition, Rachel represented something different, the quiet professional, the guardian who asked for nothing in return except the knowledge that others were safe. Staff Sergeant Murphy, whose life she had saved in Syria, had become something of a philosopher about the nature of heroism. He would often sit at the counter during slow afternoons, drinking coffee and thinking about the strange paths that led people to their true purpose. She could have been a general by now, he told Colonel Hayes during one of her visits. Could have commanded thousands, influenced policy, shaped the future of special operations. Instead, she chose to influence individuals, one conversation at a time, one act of kindness at a time. Do you think she made the right choice? Murphy watched Rachel refill the coffee cup of an elderly veteran, saw the way the old man's face lit up when she remembered exactly how he liked his eggs, witnessed the small miracle of human connection. That happened 100 times a day in this ordinary place. I think she made the only choice she could live with, he said. And maybe that's the definition of a real hero, someone who chooses service over recognition, impact over glory, presence over absence. The diner had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, not for tourists seeking to gawk at a celebrity, but for warriors seeking to understand what came after the fighting. Veterans from around the world would stop by, not to meet Phoenix 7, but to see for themselves what it looked like when someone found peace after war. Rachel welcomed them all with the same quiet dignity, the same willingness to listen, the same understanding that everyone who walked through that door was carrying something heavy. She never spoke about her time in Syria, never displayed her medals, never traded on her reputation. Instead, she served coffee and remembered names, listened to stories and offered quiet wisdom, provided the kind of sanctuary that every warrior needs but few ever find. On quiet Tuesday afternoons, when the lunch rush had ended and the diner settled into the peaceful rhythm of a small town, Rachel would sometimes stand at the window and watch military vehicles drive past. Humvees, transport trucks, personnel carriers filled with young soldiers heading off to training, to deployment, to whatever challenges awaited them. She would think about Phoenix 7, about the teammates who didn't make it home, about the weight of carrying stories that could never be fully told. But mostly, she would think about the present moment, about the elderly veteran who would be in tomorrow for his usual breakfast, about the young Marine who was struggling with PTSD, about the SEAL trainee who reminded her of herself at that age. Some stories end with parades and medals, with public recognition and official gratitude. But the most important stories, the ones that actually change the world, often end with someone choosing to stay exactly where they're needed most, serving without fanfare, making a difference, one quiet act of courage at a time, in a world that celebrates the loud and obvious forms of heroism. Rachel Martinez had chosen something harder and more sustainable, the daily heroism of showing up, of being present, of understanding that true service isn't about the battles you fight, but about the peace you help others find. Table 6 remained reserved, not as a shrine to what had happened there, but as a reminder of what could happen anywhere, anytime, when ordinary people decide to do extraordinary things. Because the most important lesson of Phoenix 7 wasn't about combat techniques or tactical superiority. It was about the understanding that some people carry their mission in their hearts rather than on their uniforms, and that the greatest victories are often won by those who choose to serve without seeking to be served, to guard without seeking to be guarded, to love without seeking to finite reward beyond the knowledge that they made the world a little bit safer for everyone around them. The quiet guardian of the coastal diner had found her true calling, and in doing so, had shown everyone who encountered her story what it really means to come home from war. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.